What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Going to be going over a standard deck for the new format. This is going to be Breakthrough through Crimson Invasion. However, I don't think there are any Crimson Invasion cards in here. This is actually just using some Shining Legend cards. You can see there is a Zoroark GX in there. However, this deck list is updated to take into consideration Crimson Invasion cards. Just so happens I don't think that there are any in there that I particularly want to put in here. This is a Alolan Ninetales GX Zoroark GX. I've been playing this game on PTCGO a lot lately. The deck has been seeing a good amount of success amongst competitive players. Has been seeing a good amount of discussion on this deck. Specifically, Jose Marrero has been playing this deck a lot and has seen some success at some local cups using it. And his list is available. I posted it onto my Twitter account, Enjoy That's ENJOI friend. On Twitter, so you guys can see his successful proven list if you would like. This list is lightly based off of his list. It has some things that it does borrow from it, but this is my unique list that kind of combines some things that I had been doing with Alolan Ninetales GX back when I was playing it with Octillery, and just a couple other cards that I think that not maybe a lot of people are playing. So this is, for all intents and purposes, this is my version of Alolan Ninetales Zoroark GX. And so it might be a little bit different than the ones that you've been seeing online, but give it a try. Been testing it, and it's been going out pretty well. What is being praised about this deck is that it doesn't really have any real auto losses, and it's just a nice well-rounded archetype. Zoroark, I think, gives this deck a little bit of a punch and some draw consistency and just better access to Aqua Patch that I think it might have been missing before. So I think Zoroark might be just the juice that this thing needed to push it over the top to be a really top-tier contending deck. So let's take a look at this exciting new archetype, Alolan Ninetales GX Zoroark GX. First of all, we start off with 3 copies of Alolan Ninetales GX, 1 copy of Alolan Ninetales, and 4 copies of Alolan Vulpix. We also play 2 copies of Zoroark GX, 1 copy of Breakthrough Zoroark, and 3 copies of Zorua, the one from Shining Legends with that Ram attack. Since we don't play any Darkness Energy in here or Rainbows, we need to play the one that has access to Ram with a double colorless. We do play 1 copy of Tapu Koko promo, 1 copy of Latios, and 2 copies of Tapu Lele, as well as 1 Espeon EX. So let's talk about these guys. Obviously, in this deck, Alolan Ninetales GX is going to be your main attacker. Play a whole lot of choice bands so that you can throw down this Blizzard Edge attack turn after turn, busting out 190, 190. It's just very, very aggressive. Now, we also play Professor Kukui in this list. I borrowed that from Jose Marrero, so that we're not just Blizzard Edge for 190, we can also Blizzard Edge for 210. 210 is very significant in that it allows you to knock out opposing Zoroark GX, Alolan Ninetales GX, and Golisopod GX, as well as any of those Stage 1 Pokemon GX with 200 hit points like Espeon GX2. So it is nice just being able to get up to that 210 benchmark with your Ninetales GX, especially since if you use something like Flying Flip early in the game, then you can just Flying Flip 1 time and a Blizzard Edge for 210 to knock out something like a Gardevoir GX with 230 hit points. So Alolan Ninetales GX is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this deck. Now, I was fooling around with playing 2 copies of the Alolan Ninetales Luminous Barrier card in this list back when I was playing it at League Cups in the previous format. However, I think 1 copy is correct now, since most decks are all hip to the fact that Alolan Ninetales GX is a thing and have an out to your Alolan Ninetales Luminous Barrier. So I think 1 copy is nice just to be able to stick your opponent in a weird spot. Maybe if they did not take their board into consideration for your little Alolan Ninetales, you can stick your opponent with this for games sometimes. However, I don't think it's going to be the primary strategy of this deck, since just so many decks play an answer to it now. Moving on to the Zoroark line, in Jose Marrero's list, he just plays a 2-2 Zoroark GX. I do like a 3-2-1 line. Just having 3 copies of Zorua means you're going to be able to get it down earlier with more consistency, meaning that you're going to be able to trade throughout the game early, which just helps with your early game Aqua Patches and things like that. Also, just early game draw. You can really lean on your Zoroark GX for that tradability, especially with 3 copies of Zorua. You can see here that I was I did cut one copy of Tapu Lele. I was only playing 2 copies of Tapu Lele in my Alolan Ninetales GX deck before Crimson Invasion was released, before Shining Legends was released, back with Octillery. I was only playing 2 copies of Tapu Lele because really you just would use 1 copy of Tapu Lele to get set up, and then Octillery would just draw you through the rest of the game. Similarly, I think 1 Tapu Lele to get set up is fine, and then usually you're going to be able to use Beacon to get some Zoroark GX into play and just start using Trade in order to draw through your deck. And with all these Zoroarks, Ninetales, other Pokemon on the bench, I really don't see you feasibly having enough bench space to bench any more than 2 Tapu Lele GX in a game. So I'm totally fine with making that consolation and increasing the consistency of our Zoroark GX line with a 3-2 Zoroark GX line. Now, Zoroark GX, useful for that trade ability. Great because you could ditch water energies and then Aqua Patch them onto your Alolan Ninetales. So it makes it very easy to pull off the Aqua Patch. But also you could get in there with a Riotous Beating because we do play double colorless energy in this deck. So Riotous Beating does 20 damage times the amount of Pokemon you have in play. That's 120. You could do 150 with a Choice Band. And then if you play a Professor Kukui, you could Riotous Beating for 170 damage, which is not bad. There are some Pokemon GX with 170 hit points, most notably Tapu Lele and things like Espeon EX. So, Riotous Beating does get in there sometimes. Maybe if you just need to finish off your opponent, maybe you flying flipped or break through a couple times, and you just need to do some damage for a double colorless, Riotous Beating is an awesome attack to have access to. We also play 1 copy of the Mind Jack Zoroark, and I've loved playing this thing in the deck so far. I found myself going for it in almost every game that I play. Mind Jack is such a strong attack since most decks are going to just be filling their bench with Bridget on the first turn of the game, not looking back, Tapu Leles, all that. Benches are chock full nowadays. With Zoroark, you can Mind Jack, do a ton of damage. You're doing you're doing like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 160 damage if they have a full bench. With a Choice Band, that's 190 damage you could do with a Mind Jack. Now we play 4 Choice Bands, so the odds of having a Choice Band are pretty high, and I really love this for just being able to be aggressive, bust out 190 damage early. I mean, as early as the second turn of the game, if your opponent has filled their bench, you could get in there with this Zoroark's Mind Jack. Now, if you play Professor Kukui, again, that's 210 damage if they've filled their bench. You can knock out things like Sylveon, actually not Sylveon GX because it resists, but you could knock out something like an Espeon GX. You could knock out an opposing Zoroark GX. You could knock out a Ninetales GX just on the second turn of the game with the easy double colorless Professor Kukui play, and that is not that unheard of. So I do like Mind Jack. I like it for finishing up things. I like that it is just a great non-EX, non-GX attacker. As far as our non-EX, non-GX attackers go, we really only have 3. And, a lot of games you're not going to play both Latios and Tapu Koko. So, maybe you play a Latios, maybe you play then the Zoroark, and maybe you play a Alolan Ninetales. Maybe you play both of these and the Zoroark to force your opponent onto odd prizes. But what's going to happen most of the time is that you'll probably go up with a Vulpix and Beacon. That'll get knocked out. Then you Flying Flip. That'll get knocked out. And then you're going to need a third non-EX attacker so that your opponent doesn't, stay on even prizes. So then you probably will go in with your stand-in Zoroark just because Alolan Ninetales is really just such a niche non-EX, non-GX attacker. So, this guy definitely helps keep you on the odd prize game, can bust out a huge amount of damage out of nowhere, and your opponent might not be expecting it. So I do really like the inclusion of that stand-in. Also, stand-in just could be useful. So many things. Stand-in can also just be useful because you could use that stand-in ability to bring the Zoroark into the active position if you happen to have your Float Stone. Then, gives your whole deck just a great amount of mobility. You could use things like Aqua Patch and so on and so forth, and then retreat and bring active whoever you want. So it is nice for just being able to switch in the active position as well. We do play a 1-1 split of Tapu Koko and Latios. Playing the 1 Latios, you do occasionally miss the free retreat of Tapu Koko, I will say. However, this Latios' breakthrough is just so good. I love being able to hit 60-30 with a Choice Band. It's just very, very strong, and the numbers are so good since so many little basic Pokemon, like your Ralts, like your Vulpix, all have 60 hit points, right? Your Beldums, such as things such as that, all have 60 hit points, so it is very good just for being able to hit that 60. Actually, Beldum does resist Psychic, so you're not going to be doing quite as much to that, but it is good. You know, we do have Rowlet has 60 hit points as well, so it is good for being able to put 60 damage onto a Pokemon GX, and then maybe you can use Espeon to de-evolve it later in the game. Tapu Koko's Flying Flip is still tried and true, very good for this deck, and also just that free retreat, allowing you to perform Aqua Patches onto your benched Pokemon is very, very good. So love the spread of these two cards. I do love the 1-1 split. You know, with cards like Buzzwole coming out, Latios is just very good for being able to hit that Psychic weakness. I do love it for that as well. Also against, you know, if you happen to be playing against an Espeon GX, you're going to be hitting that for weakness with your Latios too. So that's really, really strong. 120 damage to the active with a Choice Band against Psychic weak Pokemon. Super, super dope. So 2 Tapu Lele's pretty much, you know, goes without saying. You know, you're going to use these to set up your deck, but you do also have access to Energy Drive, so that is nice. And 1 copy of Espeon EX, which, you know, you do find yourself in some situations where Miraculous Shine is going to be the play to devolve some of your opponent's Pokemon and take some easy prizes that way. I've easily taken like 3 prize turns with Espeon EX in this deck. It's very good. A lot of times you might discard it early because you don't want it on the bench in the early game, but you might fetch it back with the Rescue Stretcher or something like that. Moving on to the supporters in this deck, we do play 4 copies of Professor Sycamore, 4 copies of N, 3 copies of Guzma, 2 copies of Professor Kukui, and 1 copy of Bridget. Now, we do get away with 1 copy of Bridget in here, though I do like 2 just because this deck sets up very consistently thanks to Alolan Vulpix. So a lot of times, even if you don't start your Bridget, you could set the deck up with that beacon attack. Just being able to search your deck for 2 Pokemon for free is awesome. So 1 Bridget gets the job done just fine. 3 copies of Guzma really is the minimum in this kind of deck. You could play 4 even if you wanted to. I saw Jose talking online that maybe he could see cutting his 1 Floatstone for a 4th Guzma, since it is technically like another switch card, but I do like the 1 copy of Floatstone. I might even want a 2nd copy of Floatstone in here, since we do have the Latios that doesn't have free retreat. Instead, since we don't have the other Tapu Koko, instead we have Latios, which doesn't have that free retreat. 2 Professor Kukuis in here helps you hit some numbers. I talked about that a little bit previously. Really do like that. And of course, we got our 4N for Sycamore. You'll notice we don't have any Lusamine or Gladian in here. I don't really think that either of those 2 supporters are going to be super beneficial in a deck like this. I think you're much better off with something like Professor Kukui, just maximizing your damage output with, you know, your Pokemon. I really do think that those are probably your best niche supporters to play. Play 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 4 copies of Aqua Patch, 4 copies of Choice Band. This is something I just love about this deck. I mean, look at the consistency. I love 4 Choice Band in these kinds of decks. It's just so good. We've got 1 copy of Field Blower, 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, and 1 copy of Floatstone. Now, I could see a couple of things here. I could definitely see a 2nd Field Blower. Getting Garbo locked is super annoying with this deck. I mean, just having to deal with the fact that you can't use that trade ability. Trade is so good for pulling off crazy Guzma plays, Kukui plays, for pulling off crazy Aqua Patch plays. You know, there's a lot of plays that you might not have been able to pull off previously, but trade helps you get those cards that you needed in order to pull off a crazy combination. And Field Blower will just help keep you drawing even under Garbodor lock. Now, you can use Ice Blade twice to knock out a Garbodor. I've definitely done that before. You know, or Ice Blade, your opponent hits into you, then maybe Guzma up the Garbodor and Ice Path GX onto it, something like that. You know, there are some options that you have outside of Field Blower. However, a 2nd Field Blower could do you a world of good in here. I know Jose, his 60th card was either a Field Blower or the Giratina promo was his other option for when he thought that there was going to be a lot of Greninja break decks at a given tournament. 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher is fine. We do play a lot of our attackers. We play 2 Zoroark GX. We play we play 3 copies of Alolan Ninetales GX. You don't really need Rescue Stretcher all that much, but it is useful for getting back things like Espeon, or Zoroark with Mind Jack, or your Alolan Ninetales with the Luminous Barrier. This card can basically mean that you could pull any of those back from the discard pile if you happen to have discarded them early in the game at the perfect time. So I do really love 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher in here, and I could even see a second Floatstone just because Floatstone is so good, and the deck does miss some of that free retreat having swapped that Latios for the Tapu Koko promo, as I had said previously. So that's it for the items. Let's move on to the energy. We are playing a full 8 copies of water and 4 DCE. I do like 8 copies of water in here. Really allows you to just get those water energies into the discard pile with ease so that they can be aqua patched more consistently. I have found that this is probably the ideal energy count in this deck. I've seen some lists play just 7, but I think 8 is optimal just because, you know, with this amount of energy, you are consistently hitting your aqua patches. You're consistently, you know, drawing energy for turn to attach manually from hand as well. And you can afford to trade some water energies as ways, you know, just waiting to get them for aqua patch later. So I do like this energy count. And all in all, I think this deck is very good. It's very strong, very consistent. If you're looking to get into standard format, this would be a good deck to start out with. I think it's very well rounded and relatively affordable as well. There's not any crazy expensive GX cards in here except for maybe your 2 copies of Tapu Lele. So thank you all for watching the video on Alolan Ninetales GX, Zoroark GX. Let me know what you think of this list and this deck in general in the comments below. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Peace.